The candles on the table were still burning when Kalen Virex's entire world cracked down the middle. He was reaching for his wine glass, fingers curled around the stem, the amber light catching the gold on his cuff, when Roven leaned in close. Too close. The kind of close that used to mean something. It didn't mean that anymore. "I'm marrying your brother." 4 words. Just 4. Kalen's hand stopped. The glass stayed on the table. The dining room kept moving around them. Crystal clinking, low laughter, waitstaff gliding between tables like nothing had shifted. Like the floor hadn't just opened up beneath one man's feet. He looked at Roven. Really looked. And what he saw wasn't guilt. It wasn't hesitation. It was the face of a man who had already made this decision a long time ago, and was only now getting around to informing the person most affected by it. "Say that again," Kalen said. "Low. Steady." Roven adjusted his cufflinks. "You heard me. I want to hear you say it again." "Kalen." His tone was almost gentle. Almost. "Sirik is a better fit. For the family. For the alliance." A pause. "For where I'm going." The candle flame between them didn't flicker. The room didn't pause. No one turned around. That was the part that hit hardest. Not the words, the silence from everyone else. Because power in rooms like this doesn't announce itself. It just quietly picks a side before you even sit down, and the rest of the room adjusts without being asked. Kalen set the napkin from his lap onto the table. Folded it once. Twice. "How long?" he asked. "Does it matter?" Didn't. And that was the answer. He looked across the room then and saw Sirik, his brother, standing near the bar, talking to someone Kalen didn't recognize. Relaxed. Smiling. A ring on his finger that Kalen had never seen before. A ring that looked, from this distance, very familiar. Hi viewers, have you ever trusted someone completely, only to realize the whole thing was a setup from the beginning? Drop your answer in the comments. The room kept moving. Kalen sat completely still. He didn't cry, didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene in the middle of an establishment where scenes cost reputations. He simply understood in that moment that whatever this had been, whatever name he had given it, whatever future he had quietly mapped out in the back of his mind, none of it had ever been real. Not for Roven. Not for Sirik. Maybe not for anyone in this room. He stood, pushed his chair back with no drama, picked up his jacket from the back of the seat. "You could have told me anywhere," he said. "You chose here." Roven looked up at him, said nothing. "That tells me everything I needed to know about what I was worth to you." He walked toward the exit. And just before he pushed through the door, he caught a glimpse of Sirik again. Still laughing, still easy, wearing that ring like it had always been his. Probably had been. By morning, the story had already been written without him. Kalen found out the way everyone finds out about things they were never meant to control, through a secondhand message, forwarded by someone who thought they were doing him a favor. A photo. Roven and Sirik at a family dinner, posed like a portrait, the announcement already live on the family's private social feed. 47 reactions. Not one of them from anyone who had called to check on Kalen first. He sat at the edge of his bed and read it 3 times. Each time his face stayed flat, like he was reading a weather report about a city he didn't live in. Then he set the phone face down on the mattress and stared at the ceiling. This is what erasure actually looks like. It's not loud. It doesn't come with a confrontation or a dramatic announcement. It comes in the form of events that keep happening without you. Invitations that go to a different address. Group threads that go quiet. Family phones that ring too long before someone picks up. And when they do, the energy is already somewhere else. Within 3 days, Kalen's access to 2 shared accounts was quietly revoked. Admin changed. His name removed from a standing reservation at the family's private club. Small things. Each one alone meant nothing. Together, they meant he no longer existed in the infrastructure of this family. He went to his mother's house on the fourth day. She answered the door, looked at him for a moment, and said the dinner table was full tonight. She'd call him. She didn't call. On the sixth day, he crossed paths with Saris Vale at a gathering he hadn't been explicitly uninvited from, just subtly redirected away from. Saris was standing near the entrance when Kalen arrived. Their eyes met. Saris smiled. Slow, unhurried. "You look tired," Saris said. "I'm fine." "Of course you are." A pause. "Just long enough to mean something. You always were. The stable one. Predictable." Another pause. "Safe." Kalen said nothing. Saris walked away without another word. But 2 hours later, Kalen overheard a small cluster of guests near the back wall. The name they kept using was his. The word they kept reaching for was unstable, then emotional, then a phrase he couldn't hear fully, but ended with not a good fit. He stood in a hallway alone and let that register. This wasn't just a breakup. This wasn't two men choosing different paths. This was a removal. Coordinated, quiet, deliberate, and Saris Vale was the one shaping the language people were using to explain it. Kalen left before anyone noticed he'd gone. His phone buzzed once when he got to the parking garage. Unknown number. No name. The message read, "Leave quietly, or we make it worse." He stared at those words for a long time in the dark. Then he locked his phone, got in his car, and drove with both hands on the wheel and his jaw set. He didn't know yet what worse looked like, but he was starting to understand just how organized this had been. Kalen went to find answers the way desperate people do, by walking straight into the room where the person who hurt them is still breathing easy. Roven's penthouse. Thursday evening. Kalen had called ahead, which he regretted the moment Roven answered, sounding unsurprised. Like he'd been expecting the call. Like he'd budgeted time in his schedule for this exact conversation. That alone told Kalen everything about who had the power in this moment. He went anyway. Roven opened the door in a house shirt, glass of whiskey already in hand, and stepped aside like Kalen was a scheduled maintenance visit. They sat in a living room full of clean lines and expensive furniture and the specific coldness of a space that had never really been a home. "You want to know why?" Roven said. "I want to hear you say it clearly." Roven looked at him for a moment. Then he sat down, crossed one leg over the other, and spoke without any hesitation. No performance. No softening. "Sirik opens doors I've been trying to reach for 3 years. His connections are direct. His family position within the firm is secured. Marrying him gets me a seat at a table that took his father 40 years to build. And me." A pause. "You were safe," Roven said. "You were manageable. There was nothing wrong with you." He looked at his glass. "But there was nothing powerful about you either." "Nothing powerful about you." Kalen sat with that. It didn't break him the way it might have a week ago. Something was different now. The devastation had already moved through the first stage. The stage where you're still hoping the explanation will make sense of the pain. This explanation made perfect sense. That was the problem. He hadn't been left for someone better in an emotional sense. He'd been replaced in a spreadsheet. "You knew," Kalen said, "when you started with me. You knew this could end here." Roven said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. "And Sirik?" Sirik understood what was at stake. "He's my brother." "Yes." Roven took a sip. "That's part of why it works." The room went quiet. Outside, 40 floors below, the city kept running. Cabs and streetlights and people going somewhere, coming from somewhere, making decisions and deals and mistakes, all of it indifferent to what was happening in this room. Kalen stood up. He didn't throw anything, didn't raise his voice, didn't give Roven the release of a reaction that would have let him reframe this as Kalen being unstable. He just stood. "I hope the table was worth it," he said. He walked to the door, his hand on the handle. "Kalen." He stopped but didn't turn. "There's no version of this that ends well for you if you stay in this city making noise," Roven said behind him. "I'm telling you that as someone who still respects you. Don't." Kalen opened the door. "That word doesn't fit your mouth right now." He left. He made it to the lobby, past the doorman, out onto the sidewalk, and then the rain started. Heavy and sudden, the kind that doesn't give you time to find cover. He stood on the sidewalk getting soaked and his body just stopped. Legs gave out. He caught himself on a concrete pillar and crouched down. Rain running off his jacket, one hand flat on the wet ground. Not crying, not screaming, just done. Just completely, quietly done. 3 weeks with nowhere to land. Kalen moved through that stretch of time the way people move through something they're not sure they'll survive. One room at a time, one day at a time, no larger plan than making it to the next morning. He checked into a mid-range hotel the first week. Nothing dramatic. Nothing his family would notice. He kept his phone mostly off. He ate when he remembered to. He slept badly and woke up with the specific kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. The money situation became real on day 11. He'd known it was coming. His access to the shared accounts was already gone. His independent account had a balance, enough to run for a while. But the contracts he'd been counting on, the ones tied to family introductions and Roven's network, began disappearing one by one. Not canceled, just never confirmed. Emails that stopped getting responses. Calls that went to assistants who were always unavailable. By week 2, he had a number he didn't like looking at. He sat in the hotel room and looked at it anyway. This is what they built, he thought. Not just the heartbreak, the financial pressure, the professional freeze-out, the social isolation. All of it timed so he couldn't get stable footing even if he wanted to fight back. He thought about Saris Vale's smile in that hallway. Then he stopped thinking about it because there was no use going in that direction without resources he didn't have. On day 19, a package arrived at the hotel front desk. No sender name, no return address. Inside, a matte black card. No number, no company name. Just a symbol embossed in the center, a geometric crest, angular and precise, the kind of design that communicated old money without needing to say anything at all. Kalen turned it over. Nothing on the back. He set it on the desk and stared at it for a long time. 2 days later, a second delivery. Same lack of identification. This one was an envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper, no letterhead, no greeting, with 2 lines of text. If you want to stop being a victim, come alone. Below that, an address. Time. 3 days from now. Kalen set the paper down beside the card. He should have been scared. He probably was scared. But underneath the fear was something he hadn't felt in almost a month. Something that wasn't sadness, wasn't grief, wasn't the specific exhaustion of being erased by people who were supposed to love you. It was curiosity. And below that, quieter, something that felt almost like recognition. He looked at the Salmeyer crest on the black card again. He'd heard that name once, a long time ago, at a dinner where adults lowered their voices when they thought the younger people weren't listening. He hadn't understood the weight of it then. He understood it now. He folded the paper, put it in his jacket pocket, and started thinking about what to wear. The address led to a building that didn't advertise itself. No sign outside. No logo on the door. Just a street number on a quiet block in a part of the city that looked ordinary until you noticed how clean it was. How still. How completely absent of the usual noise. A man at the door checked Kalen's face without a word and stepped aside. Inside, dark wood, low light, the kind of silence that came from good soundproofing and careful architecture. Kalen followed a second man through a hallway and into a room at the end and stopped. Varric Salmeyer was already seated. He looked younger than Kalen expected. Or maybe not younger, ageless was closer. The kind of face that gave nothing away. Not age, not feeling, not intention. He was reading something when Kalen entered and he finished the sentence before he looked up. That was the first thing Kalen noticed. Not rushed. Not performing authority. Just unhurried. Like the world ran on his pace and had always run on his pace and saw no reason to change. Sit, Varric said. Kalen sat. Varric set down what he was reading and looked at him. Not the way people look when they're being polite. The way a person looks when they're actually gathering information. Assessing. Sorting. Kalen didn't look away. A few seconds passed. You came alone, Varric said. Your note said to. Most people don't. I'm not most people. Something moved in Varric's expression. Not a smile exactly. More like the quiet registration of a data point. You were engaged to Roven Thale, Varric said. He was engaged to me. There's a difference. Another quiet moment. You lost your financial access inside 2 weeks, Varric continued. Your professional network was severed in 10 days. Your family chose the other side without waiting for your version of events. He looked at Kalen steadily. That's not an accident. I know. Do you know who coordinated it? Kalen held his gaze. I have a name. Saris Vale. Varric said it flat. Not a question. The air in the room shifted slightly. You were tested, Varric said. Not betrayed. There's a difference there too. You're telling me they set up the whole thing. The relationship, the replacement, the erasure as a test? I'm telling you someone used it that way. He paused. I was watching to see how you'd respond. Kalen felt something cold move through his chest. How long have you been watching? Long enough. That's not an answer. Varric looked at him like that response landed somewhere interesting. No, he said. It's not. He stood. Walked to the window. The city below moved in its usual way, indifferent to this room, to this conversation, to the specific weight of what was being offered and not yet named. I don't collect broken people, Varric said, his back still to Kalen. I'm not interested in rescuing anyone. He turned. But I do rebuild useful ones. Kalen sat completely still. And you think I'm useful? Varric looked at him for a long moment. I think, he said carefully, that you sat in a room where everything was taken from you, professionally, personally, financially, and you didn't beg a single person to give it back. A pause. That's rarer than you think. The room stayed quiet around that. Kalen looked at this man, this calm, unreadable, clearly dangerous man, and felt something he hadn't felt since before the restaurant, since before the rain, since before all of it. He felt like someone was actually seeing him, not measuring him for what he could offer someone else, just seeing him. What does rebuilding look like? Kalen asked. Varric turned back to the window. It starts, he said, with you deciding you're done being the person other people's stories happen to. Varric didn't hand Kalen a handbook. There was no orientation, no welcome speech, no moment where someone sat him down and explained the rules. There were just expectations and consequences for not meeting them. The first week, Kalen was placed in a room with a man named Darius Cole, who spoke in short sentences and had the specific energy of someone who'd stopped being patient with people years ago. Darius handed him a file, pointed at a chair and said, "You have 2 hours. Tell me what's wrong with it." The file was 40 pages of financial movement across 6 shell accounts. Kalen had never worked in finance. He stared at the file for 20 minutes. Then he stopped being overwhelmed and started being methodical. He went page by page, slow, careful, looking for the things that didn't match the things that came before them. He found 3 inconsistencies. Darius had expected one. That was how it started. Not dramatic, not ceremonial. Just Kalen sitting in a chair, going quiet, and doing the work in front of him with everything he had. Over the following weeks, the work changed shape. Some days it was information gathering, learning how certain networks operated, who held influence over how money moved through systems designed to look like they weren't moving at all. Some days it was watching, sitting in the back of rooms where negotiations happened and learning what wasn't being said out loud. Varric rarely explained things directly. He would put Kalen in a room and let the room teach him. Pause on that, because that was intentional. Varric already knew what Kalen was capable of. He wasn't training someone who needed hand-holding. He was removing the layers of self-doubt that other people had spent years carefully packing onto someone who'd never been given a real reason to trust his own judgment. Kalen started trusting it. Slowly, then faster. He stopped second-guessing his reads on situations. Stopped apologizing for observations that made people uncomfortable. Stopped shrinking when he walked into a room with people who were used to other people shrinking. And something else happened. Something Kalen didn't notice until it had already finished happening. Varric started consulting him. Not in a formal sense. Not with titles or announcements. Just asking. Before a meeting. After a debrief. A quiet question in a hallway. What did you notice? What would you have done differently? What does that person actually want? Kalen always answered. Directly. Without hedging. And Varric always listened to the end. One evening, for months in, Kalen was reviewing a contract and realized, midway through a paragraph, that Varric had known about the Roven situation before it happened. Not suspected. Known. He set the contract down. He sat with it. Then he walked to where Varric was working and said, without any build-up, "You knew about the setup before it went through." Varric looked up. "Yes," he said. "And you let it happen. I needed to see what you'd do when it did." The room held that. Kalen looked at him for a long moment. "Power doesn't react," Varric said quietly. "It prepares." Kalen picked up the contract, walked back to his desk, and kept working. He didn't ask the next question out loud. But it was there. Sitting in the back of his mind, waiting. And it was this. Why had Varric been watching him long enough to know the setup was coming? 2 years and 8 months after that restaurant. Kalen Virex walked through the lobby of a building his family had spent decades trying to get access to. And the man at the front desk greeted him by name. Not by title. Not with a formal script. By name. That was the difference. That was what 2 years inside Varric's world had built. Not a persona, not a costume. Something structural. The kind of presence that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. He was 29 now. Same face, same frame. But the way he moved had changed. The way he occupied a room had changed. There was no performance in it. No effort. Just wait. He'd closed 3 contracts in the past year that his family's firm had been circling for almost a decade. Not because he had connections they didn't, though he did now. But because he'd learned how to read the real conversation under the one people were actually having. He knew what people wanted that they weren't saying. And he knew how to give them a version of it that worked for everyone except his former family. Darius Cole, who had stopped being impatient with Kalen specifically, told him once, "You negotiate like someone who's already been in the room when it goes wrong. That was exactly right. He had been in that room. He remembered exactly how it felt, and he had zero interest in being in it again. Rumors had started circulating in the circles he used to move through, the family dinners and charity galas and private dining rooms that still operated exactly the way they always had. People talking in careful language about a new name appearing on contracts they couldn't quite place. Some of them had already figured out who it was. Most of them hadn't said it out loud yet. And Varric, quiet, unhurried, still unreadable in the precise way that had first disoriented Kalen, had pulled back slightly from public-facing work. More behind the scenes. More directional. Rumors about that too. Varric doesn't keep people close. One source had told someone who told someone else who somehow let it reach Kalen's ears. Unless they actually matter to him. Kalen had heard that. He hadn't reacted to it. But he'd thought about it later, alone, in the apartment that was his now. His name, his lease, his furniture, his life, and he'd let himself sit with the fact that he didn't know exactly what Varric meant to him or what he meant to Varric. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. That was okay. He'd learned how to let things develop at their actual pace instead of the pace he wanted them to run at. Then one morning an envelope arrived. Cream paper. Formal seal. He already recognized the family crest before he opened it. Inside, an invitation to a private anniversary gala. Roven Thale and Cyric Virex. 3 years together. Celebrating. Kalen stood at his kitchen counter with the invitation in his hand and read it twice. Then he set it down, made coffee, drank it standing up, and thought about what kind of suit he wanted to wear. The same restaurant, same chandelier, same golden light draped over the same kind of room full of the same kind of people. Kalen walked in alone and the hostess led him through without a second glance. But heads turned. Quietly. One by one. The way attention moves in rooms like this, not loudly, not obviously, just a gradual reorientation of the whole space toward something it can't immediately name. Kalen didn't look for anyone. He moved at his own pace, jacket dark, expression easy, like a man who had somewhere better to be and was simply choosing to be here first. He was at the bar with a drink in his hand before the first recognition landed. Roven saw him, across the room, through a gap in the crowd. And the thing about Roven Thale was that he had always been good at composure. That was a real skill. Years of negotiation rooms and family pressure and public expectations had made him a man who almost never showed what he was actually feeling on the outside. Almost. His glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Just for a second. But Kalen caught it. He let his eyes stay on Roven just long enough for Roven to understand that he'd been seen catching it. Then he looked away. Back to the bar. Back to his drink. He didn't need to hold the eye contact. The point was already made. Cyric found him 20 minutes later. Kalen had moved to a quieter section of the room by then, standing near one of the tall windows, city lights spreading out below. Kalen, he turned. Cyric looked older. Not badly, just the way people look when life has started to charge them for things. There was something around his eyes that hadn't been there before. A guardedness. Cyric, Kalen said. A pause. You look. Cyric searched for the word. Different. So do you, Kalen said. Smaller. Not delivered with heat. Not a performance. Just a fact stated plainly. Cyric's jaw tightened slightly. He looked like he wanted to say something that would land, and couldn't find it fast enough. The silence sat between them, and it was the most honest thing either of them had shared in years. Then a shift. Not loud. Just a change in the room's energy. The kind of shift that happens when someone walks in who the room already knows to be careful around. Whispers moved through the crowd. Kalen watched it happen, watched the ripple move from the entrance inward, and he kept his face perfectly still. One voice near him, low to a companion. Why is Varek Salmeyer here tonight? Kalen took a slow sip of his drink and didn't answer. Saris Vale found Kalen before Varek reached him. That was probably intentional. Saris had always moved ahead of situations. Positioned first, narrative already assembled, tone already set. 3 years hadn't changed that. If anything, the confidence had grown. The smile was the same one from that hallway. Unhurried, deliberate. I didn't think you'd come, Saris said. Here I am, Kalen replied. How have you been? The question was shaped to sound polite. It wasn't polite. Well, Kalen said. Saris looked at him for a moment. Then louder, just loud enough, began speaking to the small cluster of guests who had drifted nearby. The way Saris always worked. Never a direct attack. Just a slow shift in the room's understanding of a situation. It's good that you came, Saris said, smiling at the group. Kalen went through something difficult a few years back. Real instability. It was hard to watch. A pause. We were all worried. The group was quiet, waiting, the way audiences wait when they're being told what to feel. Kalen didn't look at them. He looked at Saris, directly, and said nothing. The silence went 1 beat too long for comfort. Then 2, 3. Saris kept the smile in place, but something behind it flickered. Because Kalen wasn't scrambling, wasn't defending himself, wasn't giving the reaction that would have let the narrative finish itself. He was just standing there, steady, present, looking at Saris like someone watching a trick they already know the mechanics of. And then footsteps. One person, unhurried. The crowd parting slightly without being asked, the way crowds do when the body moving through them carries a particular kind of mass. Varek stopped at Kalen's side. He didn't greet Saris, didn't look at the crowd. He simply placed one hand on Kalen's shoulder. Firm, calm, no theater in it whatsoever, and let the room register what that meant. Took about 4 seconds. Every person in that cluster understood. Saris's smile stayed technically in place. But the energy behind it changed completely. Saris Vale, Varek said. Not a greeting, not an accusation. Just the name, said in a voice that required no volume to carry weight. Saris said nothing. Be careful, Varek continued. Who you discard. Some people don't stay discarded. The cluster went quiet. The kind of quiet that travels. 2 people on the edge of the group drifted away. Then a third. Saris stood alone in the space where an audience used to be. Kalen looked at him one more time. Just once. Then he turned away. Roven came to find him near the end of the night. Of course he did. Kalen was standing near the same window again. Same drink, same easy posture. When he heard the footsteps and already knew whose they were. Roven stopped beside him. Looked out at the city for a moment. Like he was buying time. Like he was running the opening line in his head and discarding versions of it. He'd always hated going into a room without the advantage. You built something, Roven said finally. Kalen didn't respond. With Varek. A pause. That's significant. Still nothing from Kalen. Roven turned to look at him. And there it was. The thing Kalen had never expected to see on Roven Thale's face. Not guilt exactly. Guilt would have required more self-awareness than the past 3 years suggested Roven had developed. It was something closer to the realization of a miscalculation. The look of someone who ran the numbers again and found a different answer. We could, Roven started. Don't, Kalen said. Quiet. Final. Roven stopped. You made a decision, Kalen said. You made it clearly. You made it in a room full of people. You didn't flinch. He looked at Roven directly. I respected that, actually. The only dishonest part was calling it strategy when what you meant was that I wasn't worth the risk. Roven said nothing. You didn't lose me that night, Kalen continued. You just confirmed what was already true. I was never yours. Not really. I was something you held onto until something better showed up. A pause. Well, Kalen set his glass down on the window ledge. Something better showed up for me too. He turned to go. Kalen. Roven's voice came out rougher than intended. I made a mistake. Kalen stopped. He didn't turn around. You chose correctly, he said. For you. For your alliances. For your seat at that table. A beat. I hope it was worth sitting in. He walked. Past the bar. Past the chandelier. Past the room full of people who had adjusted so easily to his absence 3 years ago, and were now watching him leave with expressions he didn't owe a single second of attention to. Varric was near the exit. Waiting. Not because Kalen needed an escort. Not because of optics. Just there. Kalen reached him. They walked out together into the cold air and the city noise and the particular freedom of a night that had no more to prove. And the thing Kalen felt, the thing that replaced the grief and the rage and the quiet devastation of that first restaurant, all those years ago, wasn't victory. It was just release. The full exhale of a person who has finally, completely, stopped carrying something that was never theirs to carry. Some betrayals don't break you. They introduce you to the version of yourself you kept putting off. The one who doesn't need to be chosen to know his own worth. Kalen Virex walked into the night chosen by no one. And completely, entirely free. If this story moved something in you, if you've ever been replaced, erased, or discarded by someone who underestimated you, drop a comment below. Tell us what you rebuilt after the betrayal. Your story might be the one that changes someone else's night. Subscribe and turn on notifications. More stories that challenge, inspire, and refuse to look away are coming, and you don't want to miss what's next.